Part 5 continued. After our successful launch in Moscow, we realized that the team and technology were finally ready to move into foreign markets. After multivariate analysis and many tests, we decided on Saltillo in northeastern Mexico as our starting point. We sent an advanced squad of experienced launch specialists and marketers, rented temporary office space, and began our preparations. Saltillo is a mid-sized provincial city with a population of about 700,000. It is known for its location near one of the main battles in the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, in which the U.S. claimed Texas and New Mexico. Mexicans are friendly and pleasant people, similar in some ways to residents of the former Soviet Union. But there is one aspect of the culture that needs to be taken into account when doing business in Mexico. People don't rush here. If a meeting is set for, say, 2 p.m., arriving on time for Mexicans means coming at 2:40 p.m., and being a little late means arriving around 3:20 p.m. They have a short period of morning work, which transitions into the midday break, the siesta, when no one does anything. Promises to send a file on Tuesday might mean you receive it on Friday, and so on in that vein. But it is all done with genuine charm and a positive attitude. During our preparations for launch there, it became clear that, despite regional specifics and various discrepancies, on the whole, the strategy of launch preparation we had created and improved for all these years worked in Saltillo as well. We learned that Spanish varied between the countries of Latin America, and we had to take this into account during localization of the app and our promotional and training products. We quickly set up a call center, and at the end of April 2018, we launched the service in our very first city on the American continent. The significance of Saltillo for us cannot be overstated. It was a true combat test of whether the technology we had created and overhauled would be in demand and interesting for people outside Russia and the CIS. If they saw value in our product, the rest of the world was open to us. Again, like many years before in Yakutsk, or later in Astana and Moscow, we spent the first few days of the launch watching the numbers with bated breath. The service took off. Every day, at first timidly, then more boldly, the curve of orders and trips rose upwards. The team and I were incredibly inspired. Success in an individual Mexican city heralded our major success on an international level. A month later, in May 2018, we launched in Cúcuta, one of Colombia's largest cities. Then, in country after country, InDriver started operating in Peru, Ecuador, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Chile. Our employees worked in very difficult conditions, sometimes in the most dangerous cities in the world, in conflict with existing taxi services. InDriver's launch in Guatemala City in June 2018 took place while the nearby Fuego volcano erupted, spewing ash and stones, and the city declared a state of emergency. In Brazil, when our BDO Igor Fedorov was doing marketing research in Sao Paulo, a group of young people from the slums, the favelas, showed up in the city center. They were barefoot but carrying guns. They stopped a bus, took everyone off it, robbed the passengers of everything they had, set the bus on fire, and disappeared back into the favelas. In comparison, all the cities in Russia and the CIS seemed perfectly safe. But all this dedication paid off. The cities in Latin America took off one after another. Our best launches of years past began to look pretty mediocre when viewed against our stats in many Colombian and Mexican cities. Over the course of a summer, InDriver was launching in 10 new cities a month. In December 2018, we set a new record for rate of expansion, experimenting with launching in over 30 cities in 1 month, an average of 1 city a day. By the end of the year, all of the top 5 launches in our history were in Latin America. We had achieved tremendous success on this enormous continent. There were several reasons for this. It turned out that Latin Americans love to bargain, value freedom of choice, and are highly communicative, which was immensely helpful for word of mouth, our main driver of growth. We came on the market with a polished, powerful, and flexible technology, product, marketing plan, and tested and carefully considered business processes. The expansion was led by an experienced, highly motivated team. When we needed to quickly open an additional call center in Medellin, the team rented and furnished an office and hired and trained 10 local employees in a week's time. All these factors together led to our success in Latin America. Throughout Central and South America, we have taken over large parts of the market share that belong to companies like Cabify, Easy Taxi, and even Uber. Latin America was the only micro-region in the world in the first quarter of 2019 where Uber's revenue dropped 13%, then 24% in the second quarter. In certain major cities on the continent, we took the number one spot, coming out ahead of all our competitors. In Mexico, and then in other countries of the region, we first entered into competition with the largest ride-hailing service in the world, the Chinese giant Didi. Despite our disparate budgets and sizes, InDriver competes quite confidently with all these huge corporations. Moreover, if we are already in a city and a major ride-hailing service comes into the market and starts investing, within a certain period of time, we see growth for InDriver. This is because our competitors' investment encourages many new people using smartphones to order a car, at which point they discover InDriver offering more freedom and transparency, which they like more. A few words about our competitors. The first high-level chain we dealt with was Maxim, a large dispatcher service in Russia. This chain began an aggressive expansion campaign in our core region of eastern Siberia and the Far East, including Yakutsk. When you are a young company and you run into a strong competitor with big pockets, streamlined processes and technology, and an experienced team, it's like a novice teenager getting into the ring with a professional boxer in top shape. You have to move fast, quickly gain skills, take and handle hits, and also learn how to deliver punches. Hopefully no one hits below the belt in this round. I have to give Maxim its due. It always competed with us honestly, never stooping to nastiness or deceit. Funnily enough, after first encountering it in Yakutsk, we ran into Maxim again in Chile, at just about the opposite point on the globe. In 2014 to 2015, we managed to hold on to Yakutsk, never letting InDriver's market share dip below 50%, and then increased it to 70 to 75%. Maxim shared the remainder with other chains and local taxi services. The next competitor for us in Russia and several CIS countries was Yandex, Russia's most famous and successful tech company. Yandex has the largest market capitalization and had the biggest IPO in the history of Russian tech companies. This is a large corporation that will, if necessary, be pretty aggressive and ruthless with smaller companies, while still maintaining its positive public image. In mid-2019, InDriver caught up to Yandex.Taxi, and then surpassed it in the number of monthly app installs. Our main competitor in the international arena is Uber. The name of the company comes from the German word meaning super. In comparison with this American giant, InDriver is not that big. That company started out in 2009 in San Francisco as a black car service, before gradually designing the model that all the other ride-hailing companies would take on, including Yandex.Taxi, Didi, Ola, Grab, and many others. The company moved aggressively across the country and into cities, ignoring the requirements of local law, and began to pay substantial subsidies to drivers for each trip, thereby slashing the price of rides for passengers. It also distributed free promo trips with endless generosity and gave referral payments for bringing friends and acquaintances to the service. To implement this model, given the scale of its operation, approximately 700 cities in 65 countries worldwide, Uber has spent and continues to spend colossal sums of money, incurring serious losses. But the company is supported by major institutional investors. Over the course of 10 years, they have invested about $24 billion in Uber. Uber held an IPO in 2019, which became the second largest IPO of a tech company after Facebook. As a public company, Uber will inevitably face pressure from its shareholders to move away from its traditional loss-making model, and the future of the company is uncertain. After capturing most of the market in a given city, companies working on the Uber model often begin decreasing subsidies to drivers, little by little, and raising the commission on rides from 0 to 10% to 25 to 30%, and sometimes even 50 to 60%, while keeping rates for passengers the same. Drivers eventually find themselves in poverty, sometimes forced to work 14 to 16 hours a day to provide a basic level of income for themselves and their families. The company's entire strategy is aimed at getting drivers to act like robots, and will in the future replace them with actual robots, self-driving cars. These services also have full control over pricing and payments, making the system vulnerable to centralized manipulation. In particular, surge pricing raises questions about fairness. Unlike those companies, InDriver offers a completely free and transparent market system, in which everything is determined by the users themselves. And our competition with Uber-style companies is increasingly turning into a standoff between people's capitalism versus corporations' capitalism, as characterized by Steven Spahn, a well-known New York entrepreneur and philanthropist. Paradoxically, our Siberian startup has a more market-driven, open American system than Uber, an American company. Having achieved success in Central and South America, the InDriver team began planning for our move into North America and Africa. In North America, we chose New York as our pilot city, one of Uber's strongholds. There was one main reason for that. New York has the largest ride-hailing and taxi market in the U.S., far exceeding that of all other major cities. Only a quarter of households in Manhattan have their own car, in stark contrast to the rest of the country, where families often own 2 or even 3 cars. If a family in a large city doesn't have a car, that means they are actively using public transport, including taxis and ride-hailing services. As of summer 2018, the city was averaging about 1 million rides a day, 600,000 of which went through Uber and Lyft. This is an enormous volume of trips, and with the high cost of an average ride, the New York market is incredibly tempting. To prepare for the launch and integrate into the city, a center of international business, in the summer of 2018 we opened a small representative office in the heart of Manhattan, in one of the famous Rockefeller Center's skyscrapers. This was InDriver's 6th office, after Yakutsk, Moscow, Mexico City, Bogota, and Cape Town. To get a black car service license from the Taxi and Limousine Commission of New York, TLC-NYC, we hired the lawyer Matthew W. Dowse, a former head of that commission. He helped us get a license in 16 days, a new record. Before InDriver, the record was 21 days, while the standard period was 90. We also got a license in California, planning a launch there after New York. Tanya Tarantieva, our general counsel, and I met New York Mayor Bill de Blasio at a charity event in his mansion in northern Manhattan. He greeted us saying, "Welcome to New York. We welcome the increase of competition in the city. Good luck." And we raised a glass to that. We began recruiting TLC licensed drivers in August 2018, signing up over 5,000 in 3 months. To accelerate the process, we set up a large office to work with drivers in the JFK Airport area on the first floor of a shopping center. Ride-hailing services in New York are prohibited from accepting cash payments and direct payments through apps, and people are used to paying with cards. Our developers quickly created and implemented a payment system for bank cards, the same way that Uber and other similar services do. We added new functions, such as deductions of sales tax and insurance costs, and the feature to tip drivers. The team completed an enormous amount of high-quality work in a very short time. We translated and adapted our ads, landing pages, and other materials. The top prize was at stake, one of the largest and most famous cities in the world, and a point of entry into the North American market. In late October, InDriver did a beta launch of the service in New York. We waited tensely as the first numbers started coming in, number of installations of the app, registrations, orders, and rides. Here, once again, we saw quick growth from the very start. The team and I began to move from a state of anxiety into an optimistic, celebratory frame of mind, anticipating a new major success. But, almost immediately after that, we took a big hit. It all started when we noticed that certain passengers were taking 5 to 15 rides a day. Strange, we thought. Not too many passengers take multiple trips a day, and if they do, it usually only amounts to 3 to 5 trips per day. Then about a week later, we got the first chargebacks from banks, with more to follow. We quickly conducted an investigation and found that a significant share of our rides in New York were being paid for with stolen card information. Some unknown group of people bought stolen card numbers wholesale on the dark web and used them for in-driver. But the trips did actually take place, with different drivers. When asked, they described their passengers as very young, not much older than teenagers. The rides usually started and ended in low-income Brooklyn neighborhoods. We were facing a large-scale, well-organized fraud attack that our payment provider was powerless to prevent. Hiring local companies specializing in cybersecurity reduced the fraud, but it remained critically high, and we risked ruining our reputation with local banks. Tallying up all the pluses and minuses, I decided to stop the New York launch. Another factor in the decision was the recently adopted law requiring a service to pay a minimum wage to all drivers if it was generating over 10,000 rides a day, practically equating them to full-time employees of these services. This put Uber and Lyft at a disadvantage, and they incurred additional losses. But the deciding point was this: for a successful launch, we realized that we needed to create a full-fledged online payment division with capable local professionals who had experience dealing with fraud and money laundering. We also needed to set up a bigger team overall for a U.S. launch, with generous budgets. We decided to relaunch later, after we had prepared thoroughly and gathered more resources. For now, to get the maximum benefit out of what we had done already, our PR staff sent press releases to leading American media outlets, Forbes USA, Bloomberg, Fox News, and Mashable, among others, discussing our story. After a few weeks, we shut down ride-hailing on the app in New York. The failure in New York City was a significant blow to our ego. The team and I hadn't had any serious misfortunes in a long time and had grown accustomed to success. As I stood one evening on the roof of the Rockefeller Center, where our office was, looking out over the vast glittering expanse of the city, its skyscrapers, and the brightly lit ravines of streets between them, I thought that, although you can learn to react to failures with a calmer attitude, it was probably impossible to get used to them. They still had a debilitating and frustrating effect on me and the rest of the company. I also thought how strange and unfair it was for the team to do so much, to put so much talent, intelligence, and energy into a launch, and come out with zilch. The key question in all of this was one of strength and maintaining motivation. My closest friend is named Alexander Skripin. He's a great guy, an athlete, and a successful entrepreneur in the restaurant business. In February, for his birthday, I gave him a joint trip to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest point on the African continent. We decided to go in early November 2018. When we decided to launch our service for the first time in Africa, our marketers analyzed the entire continent and gave me a choice between 2 cities to start. The first was Arusha in Tanzania. The second was a city in Kenya. When I looked at the cities on a map, I discovered that Arusha was only 50 miles from Kilimanjaro. A symbolic coincidence, I thought. Of course, I chose Arusha. In October, it became clear that the days of our climb would roughly coincide with InDriver's first African launch. We flew to Tanzania at the start of November and joined a group that would be making the ascent up Kili, as it is sometimes called. Tanzania is a young country in Eastern Africa, formed in the 1960s through the merger of 2 territories, Tanganyika and Zanzibar, after they gained independence from Great Britain, with parts of those names also merging to create the name of the new nation. The country is home to about 120 different ethnic groups, the most famous of whom are the Maasai warriors and cattle herders. They don't eat their cattle, only drink their milk, and also their blood, which they do by slitting the skin of the animal. One of the spoken languages there is Swahili, the language celebrated in The Lion King. We heard the catchphrase from that film, Hakuna Matata, many times on our visit. It means something along the lines of, "Don't worry, everything's fine, and is going to get even better." Kilimanjaro is 19,341 feet tall, a mountain of volcanic origin, and not part of a mountain range. There's only one nearby peak, a little lower, called Mwenzi. The climb begins at Kilimanjaro National Park, situated at a height of 6,233 feet. The first day, you're walking on a trail through a tropical jungle among densely growing trees and hanging vines, watching monkeys jump through the branches. Further on, the trees gradually grow shorter and turn into bushes. The heat becomes simply warm weather. You don't see any more monkeys, but you may encounter some cute chameleons on the path. On the third day, it grows cooler, and the bushes turn into savanna, covered with low grass. Then the landscape becomes entirely Martian, a stone desert. Finally, on the fifth day, the day of the final assault, you see the snow and ice that surround the peak of Kilimanjaro. The landscape in the mountains is unbelievably beautiful and difficult to put into words. When we got to this point, we made acclimatization ascents and descents, but even so, most of the climbers showed signs of altitude sickness at 2.5 to 3 miles. Headache, nausea, weakness. It takes about 12 days to become fully acclimatized at that height, but we were in a national park that limits the time mountain climbers can spend there, so the whole ascent must be completed within a week. The guides led the group at a very leisurely pace to help with the acclimatization, and everyone had time alone with their own thoughts. I walked along thinking about how this ascent resembled an entrepreneurial career, and that we ourselves are responsible for creating conditions where the result is binary, 0 or 1. On my way up, I was hit by the insight I described in the introduction to this book. Regardless of whether you manage to achieve your goal, the peak, if you act with intelligence, energy, and talent, engaging in self-development at the same time, contributing to the development of the world, and enjoying yourself, then that is a worthwhile life experience. That is life itself. And it is a result that can't be taken away, continues to grow in value, and will always be with you. The peak seemed to stretch not upwards, but along the scale of your life. You should take everything in life as a valuable and interesting lesson that makes you better, stronger, and closer to your real self. All my failures, including the fresh one in New York, have meaning and are valuable for that. We did everything we needed to do and put all our energy into it. The InDriver team gained important experience, which we could put to good use when we relaunched. In the meantime, tired but happy, we stood, embracing, at the top of Kilimanjaro, surrounded by views of incredible beauty. Next, we unfurled our flags, took photographs, and started on our way back down to the Tanzanian valleys. The next day, we launched in Arusha. In March 2019, my mother passed away. She was a wonderful, kind, beautiful, and talented person who had had her fair share of life's challenges. Mom grew up in the hungry post-war years, one of 8 siblings of whom only 3 survived. Her health was never strong, and she was often sick as a child. At one point, she even had half a lung removed. Despite all this, she finished high school with a silver medal for outstanding academic achievement and won a place at the Leningrad Institute of Aviation Instrumentation, one of the most prestigious and academically demanding institutions of higher education in the USSR. Because of her health problems, she had no plans to start a family and raise children. Until, that is, she unexpectedly met my father, fell in love, got married, and had me. For several years, I believe she lived happily as a wife and mother. She was an engineer at a design institute in Yakutsk, but later decided to switch concentrations, got a degree in psychology from Leningrad State University, and became a sociologist. After my father left, Mom started drinking. A little at first, and then more. She also began spending time with psychics and shamans, which had an undue influence on her personality. She became more and more changed, to the point where she was unrecognizable from her old self. This culminated in serious mental illness and several months in a behavioral health facility. It isn't easy for people from normal families to imagine what it's like when someone close to you suffers from mental illness, when their personality inexorably breaks down until the kind, optimistic person you know is replaced by a haunted individual, overwhelmed by suspicion and all-encompassing animalistic fear, who sees demons at every turn. It's a particularly terrifying experience for a 12-year-old child. This tragic transformation of the most important, most beloved person in my life was the greatest shock of my existence, and I feel the consequences even now. I remember well how Mom's illness, coupled I guess with the harsh way my father had treated me, led me to conclude that there wasn't much good about life. It's a bad thing when children come to this kind of worldview, and we should do everything we can to prevent it. Diseases of this nature are well studied, but one fact stands out as difficult to explain. My mother, while fighting who knows what evil forces, told me I had an extraordinary future ahead of me. She said I would become the most successful of the Saka people, and that these forces were bent on stopping me. Back then, her words seemed absurd, like it was just her illness talking. It wasn't until many years later that I began to see them in a different light. As I've already written, there is a lot we don't know about the world around us, and not everything can be explained by science. Bit by bit, with medical help, Mom's symptoms lessened. It helped when, a few years later, she decided to move out to a village and live a very simple, ascetic life. When I sent her expensive gifts, she would simply hand them out to her neighbors. The only thing she kept for herself were food and photographs of my childhood, though she did at least allow me to buy her a house and fix it up from time to time. I loved my mother deeply, and will always love and remember her. This book is dedicated to her memory. As for me, I will do whatever I can to contribute to the work that goes into helping those with mental illnesses. This is one of the things that gives vital meaning to my life, and it stems from deep personal experience. In 2019, I completed the first version of this book and published it in the fall of that year. The book's journey into existence really began 5 or 6 years before that, when I found my identity as a developist and felt a desire to share this as a source of strength and motivation for others. This desire grew with every passing year, until, strange though it may sound, the book was simply drawn out of me. When my youngest daughter Maya was 8 years old, there was a whole year where it was just the two of us living together. I looked after her and told her bedtime stories that I generally made up myself. One night, rather than an imaginary tale, I told her a true story from my own life. She loved it so much that she didn't want to hear any more fairy tales after that. Instead, she would ask for another story about me. It was in telling her all these stories that I realized I actually had a lot of interesting stories to tell. Coupled with that initial desire, this was what led me to write my book. It took less than a year to write, and most of the actual writing was done on long-haul flights in the run-up to our New York launch, when I frequently found myself on one transatlantic flight or another. I showed the early chapters to Alpina, a leading publisher of business books in Russia, and the editors loved it. We signed a contract and I promised to complete the book in the summer of 2019. I hired a well-known Moscow journalist to edit my work, only to find that she was making drastic changes to my text and even inserting details of her own. I was surprised to learn, for instance, that I had repaid someone for doing me some service in Yakutsk with a bottle of vodka. When I asked the editor where she had gotten this information, her answer went something like, "That's how you're always doing things in Yakutia, isn't it?" Needless to say, she was fired in short order. I found a new editor, and this time we agreed that she would correct only mistakes, including any stylistic errors, leaving my original text unaltered. Given the overall success of the book, this turned out to have been the right decision. The book proved to be a good read, and after its release in October 2019, was well rated on literary websites and received many wonderful reviews. Several people who know me personally said that while they were reading, it was as if they could actually hear me telling the story in my own characteristic style. I also had total strangers get in touch to thank me for the book. Sometimes I even got messages like this one. I read your book in one sitting, then went and wrote a letter of resignation. I'm going to do something I love. A book is a big responsibility. In September 2019, I resigned as CEO of Sinet Group, and by extension, of YKT.ru. By this point, I was hardly involved in the development of the portal in any case, so stepping down really just confirmed what was already a reality. I also relinquished my position as Sinet's principal shareholder, though I kept hold of a symbolic 1% share. The remaining 99% were left in the hands of our veteran management team, Envira, to whom I transferred a portion of YKT.ru's nominal capital when we divorced in 2013. 6 years on, we now achieved a legal setup that worked for everyone. While I was no longer the main shareholder, I still held a golden share, and my vote would be required were the company ever to be sold. In addition, everyone promised not to sell shares to third parties, which meant the chances of a controlling share in the company falling into outside hands were minimal. This was important in order to negate the possibility of a power grab at YKT.ru. The thought of some politician or bureaucrat becoming the controlling shareholder and dictating editorial policy, what could be said and not said, what to delete and what to promote, was just about the worst thing imaginable. Our team of experienced directors, led by Artem Miryanov, Lena Sergucheva, and Eduard Petrov, had all the experience they needed to seamlessly continue developing the portal. At a minimum, they would ensure that visitor numbers and revenue were maintained. And this left me to continue working on InDriver. As well as transferring my shares to the YKT.ru team, I divided about 25% of the company between key employees at InDriver and also gave a significant portion of my own InDriver shares to veterans of Sinet who had not made the move from YKT.ru to InDriver. This is significantly more than is usually handed out to company employees, especially in Russia, where they often receive nothing at all. After this, we continued to furnish incoming key employees with shares, but in the form of vesting options. This is where the employee doesn't receive their shares immediately, but accrues the right to buy them over a certain period of time, typically 4 years, at the same price they were when the option was issued. The employee earns from the growth in share value from the moment they start working at the company. Consequently, they are more invested in the development of the company and increasing its value. I believe that the work we do should be fundamentally motivated by non-material values, by the desire to make a positive contribution to the development of things that really matter to us. At the same time, I think it's important to provide key employees and stalwarts of my companies with the opportunity to achieve financial success and freedom in their lives. We all live in a capitalist consumer society in which money holds great meaning. I firmly believe that a company must do its best to provide a decent salary that is competitive in the country where it is paid, and for the position to which it pertains. Companies should also give key employees the opportunity to participate in the financial success of the business by allocating them shares and making them co-owners of the company. I'm not a big fan of bonuses or KPI management in general. The way I see it, these things only work for employees who are involved in sales, or for large companies with an established business and steady growth, in which non-material motivation is harder to generate. Outside these contexts, bonuses can encourage dishonesty. There are a couple of well-known examples that illustrate this, starting with the mother who promises her children chocolates if they tidy their rooms, only for the children to start making a mess of their rooms on purpose so as to be rewarded for tidying them. Or there's the one about the Indian authorities who announce a reward for catching poisonous snakes. In this case, people respond by deliberately breeding snakes, so that there end up being many more snakes than there were to start with. On some subconscious level, people will always do more of what gets them their bonus, rather than doing what is really important right now. Life is much more complex, especially for startups who are building their businesses in highly uncertain conditions. Instead of using bonuses, I always try to make what we are doing matter to every member of the team. I pay fair salaries and enable key employees to share in our financial success by giving them partial ownership of the company. A multi-stranded approach to employee motivation, using a combination of material and non-material drivers, takes into consideration the fact that different kinds of people are differently motivated. For some people, it's the results that matter, while others set greater store by empathy and relationships. Some are driven by a desire to transform the world around them, while others see financial success as more important. We are gradually releasing more shares and distributing them to more employees, opening up our options program to an ever greater number of job grades within the company. This is a way for me to show my gratitude to our team, but I also hope that after our IPO, hundreds if not thousands of our employees will benefit from personal windfalls. Many of them are young IT specialists from humble backgrounds who have carved their own path to success. And this will further inspire all those talented, ambitious young people, not only in Yakutia, but also in Kazakhstan, Mexico, Cyprus, and all the other places we have offices, to come and work in IT. Internet users in Yakutia are a very engaged and lively bunch. This is in large part thanks to YKT.RU's activities over the years, and its commitment to freedom of opinion and user-generated content via forums, journals, comments on news items, and so on. They can often be pretty vicious too. I put this down to a process of natural selection over centuries of survival in the harshest conditions on the planet, which has resulted in a regional population that is, on the whole, particularly capable and dynamic. Since the region's principal resources flow to Moscow, and institutions at both the national and regional level are more extractive than inclusive, and social mobility is limited, there are many passionate individuals who are deprived of the opportunity for self-realization and turn to the internet as a means to express their frustration. In the many years I've spent working with this lively online community, in which trolling is not uncommon, I've developed certain approaches to avoid this kind of negativity. Firstly, you can't let people use labels to manipulate you. For example, I've always emphasized the fact that I am not a patriot of Yakutia. This whips the rug out from under the feet of the manipulative types who would otherwise apply the classic logical construction that says, if you're a true X, then you ought to do Y. In this case, if you're a true patriot of Yakutia, then you ought to do such and such. All I need to say is that I'm not a patriot, but a developist, and I do what I can to develop myself and the things that matter to me in the world, including my home region of Yakutia. The result is the same, but manipulation is now impossible. Secondly, you mustn't get drawn into an exchange with a troll. You might as well use gas to put out a fire. You can ask PR to provide facts in response to an outright falsehood, or answer yourself if this is your personal blog or social media, but without continuing a pointless argument. Thirdly, don't get riled by the negativity. You have to remember that it often has nothing to do with who you are or what you do, but rather reflects the commenter's own mental state. Sometimes it's just plain old envy, that ancient and fundamental human emotion. It's impossible to fully escape the envy of others. Plus, being sick or unhappy, or having no sense of self-worth, is a great deal worse than having to deal with a bit of envy. In Yakutia, this goes hand in hand with a well-known psychological phenomenon whereby a small community will try not to let its members stand out too much. Let me explain. Imagine a village near a small forest, all of whose inhabitants make a living by processing and selling timber. Then one family starts processing 100 times more timber than the others. This prompts concern and negative reactions from the other inhabitants of the village, since the forest is not inexhaustible. and the price of timber could fall. In our case, people don't understand that we are getting our timber from other faraway forests, or that our goal is to improve lives in all the communities where we are present, and especially back home in Yakutia. All in all, it's never worth taking anonymous detractors too seriously. You must act in life on the basis of your goals and your mission, and not according to the judgments and opinions of other trolls. Facing negativity is an inescapable reality of any large undertaking, and of success in general. It's like moray eels in the ocean, just part of nature. That said, you do need to endeavor to avoid making any real enemies with a personal axe to grind. The very best way to do this is to avoid unkindness. In 2018 to 2019, InDriver made it to Brazil, Bolivia, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, South Africa, Kenya, India, and many other countries besides. The company's worldwide launches went so well that we decided to try to speed things up by attracting some major investment. The best place to look for this kind of investment is Silicon Valley. A large number of venture capital investors are concentrated in this one location. From private investors, business angels handing over investments in the form of checks for tens of thousands of dollars, to multi-billion-dollar investment funds. In 2019, IT companies showing rapid growth could quite easily attract significant investments with a very good market valuation, even if they weren't making any money. In addition to its rapid growth, InDriver had always performed very well on the financial front, so we were confident we could procure capital from major investors, and on attractive terms, too. We like to test the waters before jumping in, so in May to June 2019, I flew to San Francisco to talk to a relatively small number of investors. I had previously met with several funds in New York, but came away feeling that these meetings had been for nothing. Those New York investors and I were on completely different wavelengths. It was only later, once I had more experience negotiating with American investors, that I understood what the issue was. East Coast investment funds are much more exclusively focused on turning a profit than their Silicon Valley counterparts. In addition to profit, the latter pay greater attention to a company's history, mission, and culture, to its positive impact on the world. My storytelling, which was primarily based on the non-material culture at InDriver, our commitment to the concept of global development, and our non-commercial projects, entirely failed to move the largely cynical investors in the east of the country. In San Francisco, I gradually set about reaching out to suitable investors, building a chain of acquaintances that began with local Russian-speaking investors and entrepreneurs. In the process, I spoke to around 15 funds. It was clear, however, that despite excellent figures and growth, we wouldn't be seeing any investment from them. I concluded that there were two factors at play here. Firstly, we were too unusual for them. What with our remote origins, from their perspective, we might as well have come from the far side of the moon. We seemed like the kind of venture you might invest millions of dollars in, only to see your money vanish into thin air. Secondly, I was too unconventional a founder, too much of an oddball, not at all like the approachable Caucasian graduates of Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. Here was someone who looked half Russian, half Chinese, precisely the two groups of people that Americans most often distrust. When I said in my Russian accent, "Let's invest to our company, all will be fine," I would occasionally see them wince. It became obvious that this way of approaching people wasn't working, and something needed to change. As with any other kind of test, when you get a negative result, which is also a valuable outcome, you make changes and repeat the test. In this case, I decided I would do three things. The first was to move to Silicon Valley, so that I would be near any potential investors. I would be able to talk about the same things and engage in small talk, those opening subjects of every meeting that have nothing to do with the business at hand, but are very important in American culture. You could say it's a bit like dogs sniffing at each other on their first encounter. If you live alongside Americans and can contribute to a conversation on, for instance, the weather, sports, or the traffic on the roads, then they will conclude that you're one of them. Your accent, skin color, and nationality are irrelevant. America is a country of immigrants after all. You arrive in the country, buy or rent a home, get a social security number, get a job, send your children to the local school, and that's it. You're an American. The second thing I did was apply to Stanford's executive program. Despite some fairly tough competition, I was accepted to attend the course in summer 2020. I reckon that Stanford alumni status would help me gain the trust of the U.S. business community. Thirdly, we quickly had my recently completed book translated into English and published a short run with a small printing firm in Berkeley. Rather than arranging a contract with a publishing house as we had in Russia, we simply published and paid for the book ourselves. At the end of summer 2019, the kids and I decamped to the small city of Mountain View in the very heart of Silicon Valley. The city is famous for being where Steve Jobs grew up and for hosting the headquarters of Google, no less. The girls started new schools. My older daughter went to college in San Francisco, while her younger sister attended a state high school in Mountain View. In the fall, once all this was accomplished and our presentations had been updated, I began a new series of talks with investors, small talk included, and handed out copies of my book at every first encounter. And it worked. Our second potential investor, a partner at Bond Capital, called me a few days later to tell me that he'd been up all night reading my book, simply unable to put it down. It felt good to hear him say what a unique story we had, that I was an outstanding entrepreneur, and that we'd built a fantastic company. He asked me to give him a couple of days so that the fund could put together a decent investment proposal. I made a point of sounding reluctant as I agreed to wait a day or two. Negotiations had begun. Bond Capital offered us $50 million in investment on good terms. After some haggling, we agreed to a pre-money company value of $400 million. Just like that, our company was worth 5 times its previous valuation of $65 million. And this was coming from a first-class fund, the entire Bond Capital team having recently split from legendary investment fund Kleiner Perkins. Bond was run by Mary Meeker, a well-known and respected figure in U.S. business circles. She is especially known for her annual report on trends in the internet industry, which she first began to compile in 1995, back when she was working for Morgan Stanley. Her report went on to become one of the most important analytical publications in the sector. In November to December 2019, the fund did its due diligence and carried out a rapid check of all the company's financial and legal documents. 2 partners at the fund, Daegwan Che and Mood Raugani, flew all the way to Yakutsk in December. These 2 hotshot Californian investors wrapped themselves up in the down jackets they had bought specially for the trip and braved the freezing fog in the city's streets to visit InDriver, talk to our drivers, and work with the team in our head office. We were a little worried when the regional airline did their usual thing of canceling our visitors' flights, leaving them unable to fly out of Yakutsk on the day they had planned. But we ended up finding indirect flights, and all was well. Bond was so impressed by the results of their due diligence that they proposed increasing their investment offer from $50 million to $70 million. We agreed to move our principal company structure from Cyprus to Delaware, this being a jurisdiction that American investors are much more familiar and comfortable with. After this, our COO, Igor Fedorov, and I were invited to connect with Mary Meeker. We met her and the other main partners of the fund in the comfort of Bond Capital's stylish office in downtown San Francisco, with its picturesque waterfront setting on the Embarcadero. A magnificent sunset was reflected in the windows and filled the room with its warm, almost magical hues. I wasn't feeling too nervous in the lead-up to the meeting. After all, I had a first-class team and company behind me. We were asked a lot of questions about the company, the team, our business model, and our plans. The partners listened with interest as we told them about our mission, company values, and nonprofit initiatives, and had plenty of questions and comments for us. It was immediately obvious that this was a true Silicon Valley fund. When the moment came, I got out the Russian tumbler doll I had purposely brought with me. This charming children's toy, modeled on an early Japanese toy, has the ability to regain its balance and right itself no matter how hard you try and push it over. I tossed the tumbler doll on the table and told them that the market in cities where InDriver was launching behaved in a similar way. I explained how organic growth in a direct bidding model allowed cities to find their own balance between supply and demand and begin to grow without additional investment in a highly financially efficient manner. Plus, we could launch multiple cities around the world, one after the other, and investment from Bond would enable us to expand globally at an even faster rate. The unexpected addition of a tumbler doll to the negotiating table had an interesting effect. Everyone relaxed, and smiles broke out all around. Mary picked up the tumbler doll from the table, examined it with curiosity, and said it was a very cute toy. It really was particularly adorable. It even made a soft tinkling sound as it rocked. Out of nowhere, she asked if she could keep it. It was such an unexpected and touching request from one of the biggest names in U.S. venture capital that of course I gave it to her on the spot. It was on this warm, very human note that our friendly meeting ended. The following day, Bond confirmed their intention to invest. They also agreed to the condition that I would get super voting status, which is when a founder has the authority to make key decisions even if their share in the company falls below 50%. This was my way of protecting myself from any unwanted turn of events. The industry is littered with examples of company founders who won investment, diluted their stake in the company, lost control, and were then fired by their investors. Steve Jobs at Apple and Travis Kalanick at Uber both experienced this, and I was not prepared to undergo the same treatment and lose control of the company I'd created. A month later, in January 2020, with all the documents agreed and signed, we received our first major investment straight into our bank account. Curiously, when it actually came to signing what was an especially important and advantageous contract for the company, I experienced a kind of last-minute intuitive sense of doubt. I forced myself to overcome it, signed everything, and learned from the experience that it's normal to feel this way at moments like these. All you can do is stay cool-headed and rational, and act in the best interests of the company. We had an amusing moment when, due to the peculiarities of calculating fractional shares, our bank transfer from Bond actually came in at slightly under $70 million. I joked to the team that we would soon find out what kind of relationship we had with our investor when we asked them to send over the outstanding $6.18. We had also secured minority investment of $2 million, which brought the total for the round to $72 million. InDriver was now valued at $472 million, almost $500 million. Having very successfully just won our first major investment, the logical step would have been to announce it, launch a massive PR drive, and get into all the leading business and tech media. But Daegwon, our new partner at Bond, gave me some very valuable advice. He said we'd be better off not publicizing the investment and generally keeping as low a profile as possible, while at the same time developing quickly into a large-scale global business. The extra noise and attention, he said, could prompt our competitors to start challenging us directly, or developing their own clones of our model. His advice was consistent with what we had already been trying to achieve by avoiding appearing in the national media, TV ads, or street advertising in the capital cities of the countries where we were launching. This meant we could avoid attracting the attention of the authorities for longer, and gave us a chance to develop freely in new countries, many of which suffer from high levels of corruption and are not places where engaging with officials is a good idea. So, we decided to continue as we were at both local and global level, in stealth mode, without publicizing our new investment. On Crunchbase, one of the leading startup databases, InDriver was still listed as having received $10 million in investment from Lida, which acted as a kind of camouflage. If a company doesn't attract investment or attracts a small sum, it implies their model isn't very effective or functional, so there's no point in either copying or countering it. This makes sense, since potential investors are privy to all a company's figures, and their decision to invest or not indicates how promising the company's development trajectory is. We even went so far as to leave the Yakutsk address of our company headquarters on the InDriver website, despite the fact that our actual head office was now in Mountain View. This way, any competitor, corrupt official, or person with negative intentions would see us as just a small remote company, hard to extract anything from or hinder in any way. I even suggested using a literal translation of the name of the street where our Yakutsk office was located, Glukoy Peryolok in Russian, and giving our address as Dead End Drive. Our PR team killed off that idea, informing me that it was going too far and could lead to unwanted associations with danger. This strategy subsequently proved to be a dazzling success. We were able to continue launching without any issues, and the first serious challenges and InDriver clones from Uber, Didi, and Yandex appeared much later, which indeed gave us time to build a truly extensive global network. Immediately after getting our investment from Bond, we carried out our first partial buyback of shares from the team. Issuing shares and vesting options is a powerful motivational tool, but one that is unfamiliar to many employees in our Russian, Mexican, Brazilian, and other offices in developing countries. A large number of them don't believe in shares at all and are much more concerned about their everyday salary. I decided it would be worth our while to do something to help them realize the value of these shares. In my view, the best way of doing this is to regularly hold partial buybacks on a voluntary basis. This means the company announces to all its employees who own shares, or options in the case of InDriver, that they may sell up to a specified portion of their packet to the company. We generally hold a buyback once a year, limited to 5 to 7% of the total shares held by the employee. We offer a buyback price in line with a 25% discount on the current value of the company. This is only fair. While the investors are buying privileged shares, the company is only buying ordinary shares from its employees. These two classes of shares come with different rights and are therefore valued differently. The only time they fall into a single class is for an IPO. 3 things happen as a result of these buybacks. Firstly, the company adds shares to its ESOP, a special pool of shares from which new options are issued to new employees. Secondly, employees who sell a small portion of their shares for a greater sum every time come to understand very clearly the value of their shares and options, and can estimate what the approximate value of company shares and their personal stake will be in 3 to 4 years' time. In many cases, this amounts to hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars in InDriver, which, you will agree, is enough to inspire almost anyone. Thirdly, employees receive additional income, which helps them solve their everyday problems so that they can work in peace and security. In early 2020, I took part in our first share buyback and sold a portion of my shares for several $1,000,000. It was the first time in my life that I'd possessed such a large sum of ready money. I'm a typical IT guy with non-material life values, and so I spend a relatively modest amount on supporting myself and my family. For several years now, I haven't owned any real estate, securities, or other assets. I don't even have my own car. For me, personal wealth is above all else an opportunity to achieve what matters to you, without having to provide a return on investment, as you do with a business. You don't need much in the way of money to live an interesting life that is full of new experiences, encounters, and personal development. In principle, money is a necessary phenomenon because many of life's resources are limited. Imagine if you had to pay for a view of the night sky, birdsong in the forest, or air. We're lucky that there are also plenty of resources that are unlimited, or almost unlimited. For the rest, including our leisure activities, we must pay. Consequently, I set about spending my buyback money on Senet and InDriver's nonprofit initiatives, which from 2020 onwards received a powerful boost. We created Senet Spark, a planning organization that began systematically implementing development projects in Yakutia. A group of young specialists came on board, mostly with scientific or teaching backgrounds, and enthusiastically began detailing the new projects that interested them. Even before Sonnet Spark, we had installed a large dome over an ordinary residential building in the suburbs of Yakutsk as part of an interesting joint experiment with Northeastern Federal University. The idea was to measure how much warmer it would get under the dome in the winter and how much hotter it would get in the summer, in order to see if the permafrost under the building would start to melt and cause it to gradually sink into the soil. The scientific team installed a variety of instruments to take measurements, including sensors in several deep wells drilled under the building. If the experiment proved to be effective in terms of a positive effect on the climate under the dome and did not have negative financial side effects, I planned to begin installing a series of even bigger domes. Perhaps we would eventually erect a dome over an entire village or micro-district with an artificial sun under the sky canopy, just like in The Simpsons. It sounds ridiculous and would be very expensive, but why not? Things like this motivate me to earn more. It's much more interesting and a lot cooler than buying yacht villas and other trappings of wealth and luxury. Jumping ahead, I can reveal that our experiment produced the following results. In winter, it was much warmer under the dome than outside. For example, if it was negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit outside, then under the dome, it could be negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit. As expected, due to the heat inevitably escaping it, the residential building acted like a heating element for the air under the dome. At the same time, on hotter summer days, the stuffy atmosphere made the environment under the dome and inside the building uncomfortable, which meant coming up with a ventilation system. And most importantly, the building began to sink into ice as the melting process accelerated. All this indicated that the technology in its current form was not suitable for use in the conditions of the region. This was not a failure, but a valuable scientifically grounded result. A couple of years later, we resumed this project in a new form, erecting a dome over a children's sports ground in the village of Okhtemcha, near Yakutsk. The new dome has ventilation flaps and is connected to a gas heating system so that children can play there even in the cold season. There should be no disadvantages in the form of stuffiness or thawing of the permafrost this time, but we shall see how this dome performs over the coming years. Another project called Star Team selected 15 children from among Yakutsk's brightest and most capable ninth graders and set about preparing them for admission to the top 100 or even top 20 universities in the world. Almost no one from Yakutia makes it to institutions at this level. Moscow State University and other Moscow universities are often considered the ultimate dream. We decided that by sending a group of students to strong universities, we could set a good example for other smart and ambitious kids and prove to them that it's possible. I promised to pay the fees of those from the first group who won places. With a price tag of up to $100,000 per year, no ordinary family would be able to afford this kind of education for their child. These students will also be able to live and work wherever they choose. The only thing they had to do was film themselves taking a solemn oath that in the future they will do everything they can to develop themselves, the world, and Yakutia. I don't believe that forcing them to return to Yakutsk will help them realize their potential or benefit their homeland. They will simply not be able to find a job that matches their qualifications. We also started giving out grants to Yakutia filmmakers via a program we called Sonnet Sokowood. Movies we had helped fund went on to win prizes at prestigious Russian and international film festivals. Whenever I fly with an international airline, it's always great to see productions we supported among the in-flight movies on offer, with the Sonnet logo and credit on display. Our list of projects goes on. We installed a tower with CCTV and thermal imaging camera at a landfill in Yakutsk to monitor the outbreak of fires that can produce a lot of toxic smoke and seriously poison the lives of the city's inhabitants. We collaborated on scientific research into the reasons for dust buildup in the city and submitted our findings to the city administration along with a list of concrete recommendations, some of which were later implemented. We expanded our anti-littering project, Musoro.net, as a result of which 127 unauthorized dumps were cleared from forests surrounding the city. We installed a lightning detection system to monitor lightning discharges over a vast area in order to understand how they are related to the occurrence of forest fires. We began experimenting with ways to make Yakutsk greener, which is a particularly sore point in the city. Of all our nonprofit ventures, our plan to set up a new university was and is the most important to us. Founding a university has been a dream of mine ever since the early 2010s, when things failed to work out with YSU. I mentioned it repeatedly in my blog posts and motivational emails to the team, until finally, we got down to making it happen. We set up Spark Labs, laboratories in which we gathered students from various existing universities in Yakutsk, gave them experienced mentors, and set them to work on the region's problems. I believe that this kind of project-oriented approach is what gets students emotionally vested in their work, to the point where they start to seek out the knowledge and skills they need for themselves. This is a huge improvement on the outdated approach that has the teacher writing something on the board, students taking notes, and cramming for their exams. The projects Spark Labs was exploring included vertical farming to provide citizens with a variety of fresh fruit, and a project to improve road conditions. The latter involved the development of a mobile application that would measure smartphone jumps as you drove around, thereby obtaining data to map the quality of the city's roads. Another project looked at urban air quality by installing sensors to measure microparticles in the atmosphere. With all the problems it has to deal with in relation to smoke from huge forest fires, spontaneous combustion at landfill sites, car exhaust fumes, and thermal power plant emissions, this is something that is particularly relevant in Yakutsk. And so on, up to a total of 7 to 8 laboratories each academic season. If everything goes to plan, in 15 to 20 years' time, we will have created a network of a dozen such campuses in different parts of the world, selecting and training talented young people with leadership potential for free. Everything will be geared toward turning out a new kind of leader who will go on to found companies and nonprofit initiatives and who will use highly scalable systems, such as IT and art, to have a huge positive impact on the world. We want to open campuses in developing countries, and the hope is that this positive impact will be primarily felt in our students' own underserved and underprivileged communities. I took enormous pleasure in allocating time for all these initiatives, feeling every bit the intellectual and developist who finally found himself doing work that was both varied and extremely exciting. I am one of those who believes that we should spend our time and money on things that we really value and find interesting in life. It's an approach that helps us be happy right here and now, and not at some constantly shifting point in the future. Don't put off living a full life and finding happiness for the future. Sometimes you may need to grit your teeth and be patient, doing something you don't value or find interesting. But this shouldn't go on for decades. Take the first opportunity you get to do what you really want to do. About a month after we got our investment from Bond, reports of a new coronavirus spreading in China were increasingly popping up in global news feeds. At first, everyone was quite relaxed about it. We'd gotten used to reports of some bird flu-type epidemic or other periodically springing up in some far-off location and quickly subsiding. Gradually, however, the rapid spread of the disease, the abnormally severe course of its symptoms, and high mortality rates brought home the colossal scale of the problem. It took just a week or two for the whole world to close its doors. Air travel was suspended as national leaders declared lockdowns, and people in some places started to panic and set about bulk buying all sorts of goods and products. The onset of the pandemic hit our company hard. Since people were confined to their homes, they no longer needed to travel by car. In just 2 weeks, InDriver's revenue fell by 80%. We were facing a challenge the scale of which we had never faced in the history of the company. Even when we were blocked in Kazakhstan in 2016, we lost less income and were able to reestablish our revenue flows relatively quickly. Whereas it was already clear that these lockdowns would drag on for months, if not longer. A chat with our CFO, Nadia Everstova, reassured me. I asked her what our money situation was in light of current falling revenues. Nadia ran the numbers and concluded that if we cut back on unnecessary expenses, such as paid advertising, the company could continue functioning for another 8 years. Our commitment to being economical and the fact that we'd secured investment from bond just before the start of the pandemic now ensured that the company was secure. Thanks to this, we were able to face the new situation calmly, without axing any of our workforce, adapting to working remotely, and laying the groundwork for future launches. The other thing that helped was our traditional focus on making a positive social impact. We immediately started looking for ways to help people out in these difficult times. The team quickly developed our Medic on the Way program, offering free transport to doctors and nurses, and this launched in several countries. They were unbelievably efficient in designing and rolling out a new courier service, helping people who were shut in their homes to access the food and goods they needed. I called the Unishki brothers, who founded Mytona, another major Yakutsk IT company, and we agreed to supply the funds to buy ventilators for hospitals in the city. Both InDriver and Mytona donated 15 million rubles, which I matched out of my own funds, meaning we raised a total of 45 million rubles, or around $600,000 according to the exchange rate at the time. News of this flew around social media, and it was nice to find myself on the receiving end of a genuine outpouring of gratitude from Yakutia residents. Many of them were worried about the onset of the pandemic, and this was a rare piece of good news in those anxious days. As the head of the Sakha Republic later said, we set a good example for others to follow, prompting many other companies and entrepreneurs to make similar donations. In the end, a very large sum was raised toward mitigating the impact of the storm. Not long after this, our office got a call from the regional government to inform us that, as a sign of the Republic's gratitude, they had decided to award the Unishkis and I civilian medals of valor. Since they also gave me just 1 day to assemble a number of required documents, I turned down the award. In the end, the head of the Republic intervened to resolve the formalities, and the medal was delivered to our Yakutsk offices. They sent me a photo of the medal, and I showed it to the girls. I told them that, according to the rules, I was now relieved of all dishwashing duties. But it didn't fly. In March 2020, California responded to the COVID-19 epidemic by introducing a total lockdown, and we decided to leave the city. I had absolutely no desire to shut myself away behind the four walls of a rented apartment in Mountain View. For the first month, we rented a little house at Stinson Beach, a lovely resort not far from the Golden Gate Bridge. After that, we took a house for 2 months at Dillon Beach, a small town 2 hours north of San Francisco. Life outside the city at least permitted us to get out of the house for walks and a bit of sport. In fact, we decided to try and master a completely new sport, the exquisitely beautiful art of surfing. I had been admiring the surfers riding the waves on Californian beaches for some time now. It's a technically challenging sport to get the hang of, particularly if your teenage years are long behind you. The best way to learn is with a professional instructor, but since lockdown forbade surf instructors from working with clients, we bought ourselves longboards for beginners and just went for it. While the waves at Stinson Beach hadn't been suitable for surfing, at Dillon Beach, they proved to be altogether too big and powerful for us. It didn't help that the water there is very cold in April, and we were freezing even in our 3.2mm wetsuits. There's a cold current that runs along the coast there and keeps the sea off Northern California generally cold. Silicon Valley has this to thank for the pleasant climate it enjoys year-round. In winter, the ocean acts as a heater, and in summer, as an air conditioner. Another thing that appreciates the cold water is the great white shark, the most dangerous shark to humans. We later discovered that the area off Dillon Beach is unofficially known as Shark Pit because it has one of the region's highest concentrations of great whites. Needless to say, we weren't aware of this when we chose Dillon Beach for our surf training. Thankfully, we didn't see one shark in the whole 2 months we were there. We didn't learn much surfing in the end, but we did come to love paddling on our boards in the ocean, and we learned not to be afraid of big waves and cold water. The real surfing came later, in San Diego and Hawaii. It's a very special sport, and I'm completely in love with it. For me, it's not so much about how fast you can ride the surf, as it is about the moment when you're sitting on your board in the ocean, waiting for your wave, and you see how wonderful the world around you really is. You take in the endless sky, the clouds, and the sun. You admire sunrises and sunsets, smell the ocean, and feel the rhythm of the waves. A few meters away from you, a curious seal may poke its head out of the water and fix you with its gaze. In other words, all thoughts of work are forgotten as you feel what it truly means to be alive. This is especially meaningful for someone who happens to come from a region where the ice on rivers and lakes grows 2 meters thick, and few people know about surfing, who is overly motivated by non-material values and is constantly thinking about his work. Surfing has become a kind of meditation for me, a way to feel at one with the world. Moving to the United States enabled me to start developing my own network of American business contacts, from hotshot entrepreneurs to the leaders of major companies. This was partially facilitated by my studies at Stanford, through which I met over 100 entrepreneurs, investors, and managers from all over the world, but mostly from the U.S. I was, in fact, the first Saka ever to graduate from this illustrious institution, consistently ranked as one of the top 3 universities in the world, and this is naturally a source of great personal pleasure and pride. Networking was made significantly easier by having secured investment from a strong fund. The team at Bond Capital is extremely well connected, and might easily write to me and ask, for example, "Would you like to meet the CEO of Booking.com?" On the back of this, we were able to put together a fantastic advisory board to provide advice and guidance on a variety of areas of entrepreneurship and business. This is how we landed David Gordyansky, creator of leading VPN service Hotspot Shield, David Drummond, former chief legal officer at Google, Noam Barden, CEO of Waze, Fraser Robinson, former head of EMEA at Uber, Arnen Gashuri, former VP of HR at Tesla, and other top-notch professionals. An advisory board is a very useful tool for company development, so long as you find strong, motivated advisors. As a rule, there are 2 things that interest them: an exciting story and great company values, and a vesting option for stock that will clearly make the advisor a lot of money in the not-too-distant future. Among others, it was interesting to speak with Travis Kalanick, the creator of Uber, and one of the most famous internet entrepreneurs in the world. We were supposed to meet for coffee in San Francisco, but the pandemic hit, so we had a Zoom call instead. Travis had a lot of questions about our model, and it was clear that he was still curious and interested in everything to do with ride-hailing, despite the fact that he had been forced out of the company 3 years earlier. I suggested he might invest in InDriver out of his personal funds, to which he smiled and replied that, although he was no longer an Uber shareholder, he wouldn't like to upset his former associates by investing in a direct competitor. It's an obvious fact that everyone makes mistakes. There's no such thing as a person who can do everything perfectly, who always gets it right, and who makes only strong decisions. Mistakes can be made by employees and founder alike. This potential weak spot can have various negative consequences, from demotivation and conflict to individuals leaving the team entirely. In situations such as these, I fall back on the principle that responsibility is not the same as guilt. If a person does everything they can in the time required, then a negative outcome is their responsibility, but not their fault. Since they are responsible, they must take measures to ensure that next time the result is a positive one. A mistake is an opportunity for improvement. It's a similar principle to the idea that your failures in life are not the same as your shortcomings. At the same time, credit for success should be given where due, even if there are external contributing factors. In other words, when failures happen, despite everyone doing the right thing and putting in the necessary effort, the focus is on the circumstances of the failure, and a necessary emphasis is placed on doing things differently and being more effective next time around. Conversely, when success happens, the focus is on giving credit to the person who made it happen, i.e., on the individual. Adopting this position fosters drive, confidence, and a calm working environment.